Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin. Chapter 19. With the use of the private jet, Raelle beat Scylla and her crew to the hotel at Fort Salem. She was glad for the early arrival. It gave her a chance to meet with the hotel's head of security, Mark Neal. The short, balding man with his tweed suit reminded Raelle more of a professor than a security expert. And as he showed her around the hotel, he reviewed its history as much as its security features. Following him towards the ballroom, she felt like she was listening to a lecture. Over here is where Mary Good is rumored to have thrown herself from the upper level when she found out that her husband was having an affair with her brother, Neal said, gesturing to the area overlooking the ballroom. Looking up, she peered at the wood panels and the antique crystal chandeliers. Along the walls, they had kept the original gaslit sconces, though they had been retrofitted and modernized for electricity. It really was a beautiful hotel. Raelle studied the balcony and ran possible scenarios. Neal saw ghosts while she calculated security risks. Noticing a weak point, Ray asked, "Do you have people up here tonight?" "Well, no," Neal said, surprised. Raelle shook her head. "That won't do. I want at least one man per side, preferably two." "But the exit points will be guarded," Neal protested. "It's a great vantage point for the ballroom here," Raelle reasoned. "Oh, well," Neal answered, jotting down a note on his legal pad. "If you insist." Raelle checked out the rest of the ballroom and then the stage. A couple of techs were doing sound and lighting checks, and a man carried out a stool and a guitar stand that he put at one corner of the stage. The other was dominated by a beautiful piano. Raelle looked down from the stage as Neal peered up at her. On the floor, staff were already putting out the crystal goblets and silverware on the tables. The charity event was an exclusive $500 a plate event with the option to go to an after-party to mingle with Scylla. That cost another $250, but promised personal access to the musician and an open bar. Raelle exited the stage and joined Neal. "Let's look at the reception area." Neal sighed, but led the way. The reception area was more intimate and included a private room in one corner. For the musician to go, she needed a break from the crowd. Across the room was the bar, and staff worked at unloading bottles of champagne from boxes. Finally, they reviewed the primary and secondary routes to the suite, and Raelle pointed out where she wanted security stationed, and what aisles she wanted to be kept clear in case of an emergency exit. At last, they examined the suite of rooms reserved for Scylla and the crew. She was looking at what would be the musician's bed for the next couple of nights when a familiar voice rang out. "Think it's big enough for two?" Raelle turned, looking into the cerulean gaze of Scylla Ramshorn, and answered with an even tone. "It will do." Scylla laughed, and Neal's brow shut up as he turned and blubbered his hello to the musician, who offered him a smile and shook his hand. "Thank you for your hospitality," Scylla answered. "But I think I'd like to get settled in before the press conference." "Of course, Miss Ramshorn. Miss Caller?" Neal backed out of the bedroom, and they heard him bump into a table and curse on his way out the door. Scylla shook her head and laughed again before her expression became somber, and she turned to her bodyguard. "How's your dad?" Raelle frowned. He's got a long recovery ahead of him, and he's stubborn as a mule, so he'll fight rehabilitation every step of the way. Scylla smiled. Stubborn? Where have I seen that before? Rael smiled. Yeah, speaking of that, why didn't Porter call to let me know you'd arrived? I didn't want him to bother you when all I did was get out of the car and walk into the hotel. Rael stepped closer to the musician. Did you get ambushed by the press? Scylla shrugged and Rael snorted. Really, Scylla? You have to cooperate with the procedures I put in place. The musician pursed her lips. Kiss me, and I'll consider it. Scylla, Rael chided. Rael, Scylla pouted, and walked up to her bodyguard. You don't want to give me a good luck kiss for tonight? Rael sighed, but then reached out a hand, cupping Scylla's face. Thank you for making arrangements for me to get to my dad. She tipped her head, meeting the brunette halfway and kissing her. It was a chaste kiss, and Rael broke it off long before it could become more. You want to freshen up? Rael asked. Scylla gave a nod. Yeah, I suppose that I should before Garrett comes after me. I'll be in my room. Room service was supposed to get my other suit pressed and I need to change. Oh, Scylla said, following Rael into the living area. About that. I asked Moffat to order you some clothes. I know you probably wouldn't have had a chance to pack. I had them put them in the other bedroom. I thought that was Byron's room, Rael answered. Scylla smiled. He can have a suite to himself down the hall. I wanted you close. Okay, Rael said, changing directions and started towards the bedroom on the other side of the living room. There was a knock on the door to the suite and Rael switched directions again, opening it to reveal Moffat with Porter and Byron in tow. They carried in several dress and suit bags, while Moffat wheeled in a portable hair and makeup kit. Rael peered outside the suite, satisfied at seeing the two armed guards at the door, and then ducked back inside and headed for her own bedroom. Porter knocked softly at her open door as she turned to look at him. Everything okay on the trip over? Porter nodded. I'm sorry she got by me at the door. Rael shrugged. It's okay. At least the place is fairly secured. Rael? Porter began, shifting uncomfortably. Rael's brow quirked and she looked up at the blonde. Yes? I just wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to get better. I know that I'm not some professional like you, but I love Scylla. I just want her to be safe. Her happiness really is everything to me, and everyone knows you make her happy. Rael swallowed. She was dying to ask him the question. Had he had sex with the musician? But she resisted. In the grand scheme of things, what did it really matter? If something had happened between them, it was ancient history now. You're welcome, Porter. Let's just get her through this event. Porter nodded. Sounds good, Rael. He walked out of the room and Rael turned back to the closet. She picked out a suit, the fabric expensive and the cut very modern, and then made her way to the large bathroom to shower, to get ready. Rael knew that Scylla's name usually equaled large crowds of screaming fans, but she was surprised by the crowd gathered at the hotel. Given the venue and the price of the tickets, Rael had thought it would be a more subdued crowd. Instead, when Scylla emerged from the lobby door of the hotel, prepared to make her way to the small stage erected in front of the grand entrance, she was met by an onslaught of young men and women on either side of the roped-off walkway to the stage. There were several groups holding pride flags and just as many holding posters with Scylla's name. Rael stepped up beside Scylla and offered a small smile. Porter exited the door and stood on the musician's other side. They paused, giving the lead to an older woman whose petite frame and mannerisms reminded Scylla of Sophia from the Golden Girls, complete with her large round glasses, chains dangling on either side. Based on the way she marched by the crowd, the bodyguard would wager she had the matriarch's personality as well as her looks. The manager of the charity event took to the stage and the crowd reluctantly settled down. After speaking for several minutes about the importance of the event and how much money would be raised to support orphans in the state, the older woman smiled at the crowd. Well, you've heard enough from me. For those of you not attending the concert tonight, I'm sure you would like to hear from Scylla herself. Scylla walked with her group and mounted the stage while Porter and Riel took up positions in front of it. The musician stepped up to the podium and lifted the microphone from his stand and moved away from it so she was facing the crowd. From Riel's position in front of the stage, she frowned. She didn't like seeing the brunette so exposed in an unknown crowd. She shifted position as the chants of Scylla, Scylla began again. The musician eventually hushed the crowd and began to speak. Thank you. I'm so glad that you came out today to help bring awareness to this important issue. Foster care programs and children's services need our help. Every day, children are removed from their homes due to abuse or neglect. Some children, though, end up in the system simply because they have no one to care for them. Scylla paused and then began again. This is a subject that is close to my heart. As many of you know, my brother and I lost our parents while we were still teenagers. Luckily, my parents had a plan in place that would ensure we received proper care and attention, but many parents don't. Much like planning out a funeral, the idea of planning out what will happen to your children if you unexpectedly pass is a subject most people avoid. A few murmurs could be heard from the crowd and cameras flashed. Although Scylla's admission wasn't especially hot news or even really something that people didn't know, they'd never heard the musician herself openly talk about it. My brother Byron and I are proud to partner with the Twist Foundation. Based on the popular Dickens character Oliver Twist, the foundation aims to raise money to provide education, free legal aid, and monies to help children who are orphaned. They also offer free planning guides and legal advice to assist parents who do want to make alternative plans for their children's care just in case the unthinkable happens. For those of you not attending the concert tonight, you can still help out. Go online to their site and make a donation if you can. You will also find links to my merchandise and prints of Byron's art that you can purchase, and all proceeds will go to the charity. The crowd applauded politely, and Scylla smiled and nodded. Does anyone have any questions about the charity? A couple of reporters stepped forward, and between Scylla and the manager, they were able to provide the answers to the questions. As the queries began to turn more personal, Scylla shut the press conference down with the offer of an impromptu performance. The crowd went wild, drowning out any further questions from the reporters. A tech came up onto the stage with a stool and a mic stand, and Byron walked out to the stage carrying a guitar. Rilla's brow lifted, recognizing the instrument. Scylla accepted the guitar from her brother with a smile and perched on the stool. She made a show of adjusting it while she leaned towards the microphone and spoke. This guitar is pretty special to me. It belonged to my father. The song I'm going to share is about someone special to me. Scylla paused, good-naturedly, as the crowd began to cheer, and she smiled as she heard the shouted questions about who that someone special could be. Thank you. So it seems fitting to use this instrument for this occasion. I'll admit, I'm a little nervous, so please be gentle with me. The crowd leaned in, the anticipation palpable in the cool fall air as Scylla began to play. Riel had a routine and was familiar with the job when it came to her performances. Don't pay attention to the client. Watch your surroundings. As all eyes were on Scylla, Riel continued to scan the crowd, wondering if one of the smiling faces could be that of a killer. Still, Riel's ears worked just fine, and she was entranced by how beautifully the brunette played the guitar. There was passion, vulnerability to the raw emotion she's put in her lyrics. Scylla was delivering her vocals with a sensitive grace. It was a side that Riella was not expecting. This would be the Scylla that wasn't created by Garrett. The chords she played painted a picture of a waltz with the person that meant the most in her life. Remembering their conversation at the gay bar, the bodyguard attempted to listen beyond the melody and to the lyrics. There's something we have between us. As Scylla sang, the lyrics captured Riel. The bodyguard struggled to stay strong and professional. She was the one person who could make her feel weak. Could it be that Scylla felt the same way that she did? Garrett stalked behind Scylla, following her back to her hotel suite. Once they entered the room, he slammed the door behind him. The musician turned at the sound and faced her publicist. "What the fuck was that horseshit?" "Excuse me?" Scylla asked, her blue eyes flashing. "That song! That's not what we discussed. You said I should sing a song at the press conference, so I did. I meant something popular, or at least something sexy. That new song about desire, maybe. Not some fucking I love you, do you love me too crap." "I thought it was a beautiful song," Byron said, defending his sister. "So did the fans and the press," Isadora said, looking at the Twitter feed on her phone. "People are going nuts, and they're already making assumptions." "What?" Garrett asked, stepping up to the manager and grabbing the phone from her hand. His face reddened at the sight of a video fan edits of the song with various pictures of Scylla and different people. The one with the most favorites was several stills from the photo shoot with Rael. "Just fucking great," Garrett muttered. As Rael entered the room, he handed the phone back to Isadora and stormed out of the suite. He knew he was going to have to do something to save the musician from herself if she wanted that Oscar. "What's wrong with him?" Rael asked. "Something is stuck up his ass, and it's not me this time," Byron said with a chuckle. Shaking her head at her brother, Scylla turned to Rael and shrugged. "He's pissed that he's not micromanaging like usual." "Right," Rael answered, avoiding the musician's gaze. The lyrics from Scylla's song were still replaying in her head. Had that song been about them? The words were so familiar to her. Scylla frowned, her eyes seeking out but failing to capture the pale blue eyes of her bodyguard. She wondered if Rael had recognized the song for the confession that it was. Another concert, another costume. Moffat and Scylla had been doing this routine for so long, it was as if they were in a dance themselves. Moffat looked into Scylla's eyes through the mirror as she worked on putting her hair back in a loose bun. "That song at the press conference was so romantic." "You think so?" Scylla asked, biting her lip. "Of course. And stop that, you'll mess up your lipstick." Scylla forced herself to relax in the chair. "Did you see Rael's reaction?" Moffat shrugged. "Well, you know how she is on the job. So serious, all businesslike." "Oh," Scylla said. "But I noticed she got this smile on her face, and I think she was hoping that it was about her." Scylla smiled, and Moffat quirked her brow. "It was about Rael, wasn't it?" "Yes," Scylla confirmed. Moffat beamed. "You two will be amazing together." "I just need to convince her that we will be," Scylla said. "Oh, I think she knows. She's just worried about keeping you safe with that psycho on the loose." Moffat finished fixing the musician's hair and then helped Scylla put on the finishing touches to her outfit. The musician had just stepped into her heels when Rael walked into the room and made an audible gasp. "Goddess, you look incredible," Rael said, her eyes raking over the musician in her red suit. As Rael's attention was drawn to the long black tie around the brunette's neck, the bodyguard had to fight the urge to use it to pull the brunette in for a kiss. Her mind thought of a few other ways she could use it, and she felt that familiar ache in her core. "You look pretty fantastic yourself," Scylla said, giving Rael an appraising expression. The form-fitting black suit looked amazing on the blonde, and she was glad she'd had Moffat track down a suit similar to the one the bodyguard had worn during the photo shoot. As the women stared at one another, Moffat slipped out of the room with neither of them noticing. Scylla snapped out of her trance with Rael and noticed the room was clear. The musician started towards the door to lock it while she had the chance. In a split second, Rael cut her off with an extended arm, keeping the door closed with her back. Rael locked the door and looked at Scylla with passion in her eyes. "I think I need to do a perimeter check before we leave." The musician could only smile at the cheesy line, as a rush of warmth flooded her body, seeing Rael staring back at her, leaned up against the door. Despite her fame and countless interviews and concerts, the brunette was speechless with excitement. Scylla was powerless when it came to how Rael made her feel. Before Scylla could respond, Ray reached out, grabbing the brunette's hand, and pulled her close. Unexpectedly, Rael stared into the musician's eyes a little longer, cupping the side of her face, and then the blonde went for the deep kiss. They had many moments when they tried to get time together, more stolen kisses and quick caresses, than they could count, but this kiss was different. It took Scylla's breath away. Anything, huh? Rael husked slightly, pulling back from the musician's lips. Anywhere, Scylla confirmed, kissing her bodyguard again. She deepened the kiss and felt Rael respond, the bodyguard pulling Scylla into her arms. The bang that sounded on the other side of the door wasn't muffled, and Scylla stepped back, her eyes still soft, vulnerable, with an emotion that Rael had never seen before in the musician's gaze. They continued to stare at one another, fixed in the moment, both wanting to speak but unsure of what to say. The knock came again, more insistent and accompanied by the sound of Garrett yelling this time. Reluctantly, Rael stepped away from the door and Scylla swallowed and gave the blonde a small smile before unlocking it and stepping out. Garrett glared at Rael, and Moffat smiled, stopping the musician long enough to fix her lipstick before they followed her towards the backstage area. Rael exited a side door that put her out among the guests, and she settled into a position where she could provide the best protection for her musician. It was only a few minutes later that Scylla stepped onto the stage and the guests applauded her entrance. Garrett paced back and forth in the small space behind the stage. By all accounts, Isadora and Byron thought that the concert was going well, and the people seemed to be enjoying themselves, but the publicist wasn't satisfied. Scylla had sung that love ballad again, and although the guests went nuts, giving the song a standing ovation, he knew it wasn't the kind of thing that would get the press buzzing for days. They needed something else. The publicist had already called Beth earlier in the day, feeding Scylla's friend what she wanted to hear, that Scylla liked her, that she'd had fun at the theater. Then he'd set it up that Beth would come to the stage. The musician would be singing the song she wrote about the movie when she came back after a short intermission, and he would have Beth with her. He also prepared a few bottles of water with his own concoction to get Scylla to loosen up. He knew how she was when she got high. A touch here, a caress there, and Beth would have the musician primed for one hell of an after-party. Scylla stepped backstage during the intermission, and Moffat rushed forward to reset her makeup and hair. The musician waved her off for a second, beckoning to Garrett instead, who stepped up with a smile and a bottle of water. That was what she needed the most. She knew that she looked good in the suit, but with the stage lights, it was impossibly fucking hot out there. She was parched. Greedily, she finished the first bottle and reached for a second. Babe? Might want to go slow there, Garrett warned. You don't want to get sick. He wanted her to drink his little concoction, but not all at once. Better she sip it slowly for the best effect. Luckily, Moffat agreed and stepped forward again, fussing over the musician. God, Syl, you look absolutely fuckable. Scylla looked up and smiled as Beth Treefine stepped up to her, wearing a classic little black dress. You look good yourself, Scylla purred. She was already feeling a bit better from drinking the water. She reached her hand out again, and Garrett reluctantly handed her another bottle. You think you've got the song down? Yes, it's a great little tune. It fits the atmosphere of the film perfectly. Okay, we'll sing it, and I'll see you at the party afterwards, right? Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world, Beth purred. It's a date. A tech came out, giving them a 2-minute warning, and Scylla prepared herself to go back out on the stage. Garrett handed him a couple more bottles of water and instructed them to be placed on a table by the musician's stool. The next set would contain more of Scylla's more popular and energetic music. The musician would need to take a few sips now and then. Garrett smiled, looking forward to seeing the siren he had created emerge on the stage. Scylla reached for Beth, and as the lights in the room went down and the musician stepped onto stage, arms linked with Beth Treefine. Most of you know my good friend Beth Treefine from her position as artistic director for the Fever Dreams Festival at the Tarim Theater. If you haven't gotten a chance to see her newest film, then as soon as you get home you need to get on their site and rent it. Thank you, Scylla, Beth cooed. You can find Twisted Confessions at the Fever Dreams site or on the recent events page for the Tarim Theater. And now, Twisted Games. The music started and Scylla began to sing, Beth chiming in. The artistic director certainly shouldn't quit her day job anytime soon. Raelle thought from her place in front and off to the side of the stage. However, the song was good and Beth's voice was adequate enough. It was working, judging by the applause. The crowd liked the song well enough, and after it was done, Raelle watched the filmmaker step down from the stage and return to a table in the crowd. The musician paused, drinking more of the water provided, and then jumped into the next several songs. The concert went on for another hour, and finally she finished the evening with the song that catapulted her to fame in the first place. As Scylla raised her arms to acknowledge the applause, Raelle finally glanced from the crowd and to the musician on the stage. She frowned at seeing Scylla. There was something off about her, different from before the concert had started. It reminded her of the way she'd been on the set at the morning show. Was Scylla high? Surely not. As Stella made her exit, Raelle did not follow her, which was the plan. Instead, Moffat and Porter would meet the brunette backstage and help her with her wardrobe change for the after-party, while Raelle made her way to the reception room and completed a sweep to greenlight the room for the musician to enter. She had just made her second sweep and used the comm system to give Porter the okay when Tally squealed from across the room and ran up to hug her. "Goddess Ray, I can't believe you got us VIP tickets." Raelle laughed at her friend, hugging her back and giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. "Well, you know the saying. Go big or go home," Abigail answered, coming up to the pair. Raelle smiled at her former unit partner. "It's good to see you, Abs." "Yeah, well, Mom wanted to make a big donation to the Twist Foundation in the Bellwether name and insisted that someone in the family bring the check in person. I volunteered so I could see my favorite shitbird." Abigail took her turn and gave her friend a hug. "So, you follow my advice?" Raelle smiled. "Sort of." "How are things between you two now?" the redhead asked. "Everyone on Twitter was buzzing about the song today. Was that about you?" Raelle blushed. "I think so, Tally. We still haven't really got a chance to talk." "How's your father?" Raelle recognized the voice, and her brow rose at the sight of Dr. Alice Monroe dressed in a navy blue suit. "Quinn, that's one of my mom's oldest friends. Called earlier, and said he was doing okay. They plan to release him tomorrow." "Good to hear," Sarah Alder said, coming up to them and slipping an arm around Tally's waist. "Yeah," Raelle answered, surprised by the obvious display of affection borderlining on possession. Abigail studied her friend and finally nodded. "This looks good on you. Whatever it is that you've got going on here. It suits you." Raelle blushed. "You think so?" "Well, your taste in clothes has improved, at least." Beside Alder, Dr. Monroe chuckled softly and let her eyes roam down the blonde. The black suit was cut low and with no shirt underneath. She found her eyes fixated on the bodyguard. "You really do look great tonight." "Thank you," Raelle answered automatically and then added, "Scylla picked it out." "Oh?" Alice answered, disappointment in her eyes. "The two of you have worked things out then?" Alder asked. "We're working on it," Raelle answered, and turned her head as she sensed the energy in the room change. Her friends sensed it too, and she noticed that they had all gone on high alert. In her ear, the speaker came to life with Porter's voice letting Raelle know that Scylla was only a couple of minutes away from making her entrance. Apparently someone had also alerted the press, because they came into the room, cameras ready to take a few shots of the musician as she made her grand entrance and mingled with her adoring fans. Raelle and her friends turned to the reception room door and watched as the musician made her entrance dressed in a simple pair of black slacks and a navy blue satin blouse, waving and smiling at the group as they applauded. Thank you," Scylla said, walking among the guests. She reached a raised area in the corner of the room where a woman played a piano and spoke as the music stopped and everyone became quiet. "Did everyone enjoy the concert?" There was a flurry of applause, and a smattering of yeses could be heard. After the noise died down, Scylla continued. "Of course you did. I want you all to have a good time tonight. You certainly earned it with your generous contributions to the Twist Foundation." Scylla waved her arm again at the crowd and then gestured for the piano player to play. She stepped down from the platform. Scylla scanned the crowd, wondering where the hell is Raelle. As her eyes finally landed on her bodyguard, She was simultaneously shocked and angered by the sight of none other than Dr. Ellis Monroe standing between her bodyguard and that damned FBI agent Alder. Tally was there too, and chatting with a sexy woman Scylla thought she recognized, but couldn't place. She was about to stalk toward them when Beth Treefine blocked her path, drinks prepared by Garrett in hand. The dark-haired woman handed Scylla a glass of what looked like champagne, and the musician drank the entire glass in one go. Beth couldn't resist smirking. It had been many years since she'd had the pleasure of seeing Scylla like this, and she looked forward to making sure that they both got to have some fun. "Where were you going? You were acting like the building was on fire." Scylla shook her head, trying to clear it. "I was trying to find Rael." "Why, it's not like you need protection here," Beth answered, frowning at the mention of the bodyguard's name. "And if you do, I can always cover you," Beth said, smirking. Scylla looked at her friend, indecision on her face. "Let's have another drink, maybe sit down. I'm sure you need to rest after the performance." Scylla looked around the room. "I'm supposed to mingle." "Baby, if they want to see you, make them come to you." Beth took a step closer into Scylla's personal space and ran a hand up her arm. "Besides, I want to thank you properly for the song." Scylla squinted, looking at Beth and then beyond her, her eyes still searching the crowd. Who was she looking for? Rael, yes. But apparently the bodyguard was more interested in the doctor than her. Beth's hand had moved as the brunette stepped in closer, slipping an arm around the musician's waist. Scylla swallowed, her throat dry, as she looked at Beth. "Let's go get another drink. The crowd can wait for a few more minutes." "Okay," Beth said, leading them towards the private room in the corner. As they neared the door, Garrett smiled at Beth from across the room and winked. Inside the room, Beth found all the party favors that the publicist had promised would be waiting for them and then some. Although she hadn't been good friends with Scylla and her crowd when they were younger, she still knew all the musicians' little temptations. Sitting down next to the buffet style of pills, powder, and inevitably pain, Scylla started to lose her focus. She had already started to feel a little off-balancing during the second set of the show, and now she was upset at seeing the fancy Dr. Ellis and the FBI at her party. How could they even afford such an event? Scylla contributed the off-balance feeling to a long day, and how she'd revealed herself. She'd been vulnerable for Rael, giving her all for the bodyguard, but beyond the brief interaction in the dressing room, Rael still didn't seem to get it. Why? Now she looked at the cornucopia of goodies and felt the pull to just escape. Beside her, Beth was already preparing lines on the coffee table in front of the couch, and Scylla swallowed hard. She had yet to touch any of the choices on the table, but Scylla felt the tingles in her hands. Her senses were heightened, her heartbeat just a little faster. Looking at Beth, she knew this wasn't love. But it was real. It was physical, and Beth was willing and wanting. And if Garrett was right, it would be the best she would ever be able to do. Maybe she should just accept it. As Beth moved away to give Scylla room, the brunette bent over the table. Later, after catching herself kissing Beth and jerking back, realizing that this wasn't what she wanted at all, the musician staggered to the door of the private room and stepped out into the crowd. She scanned the room, seeing dozens of strangers, all looking at her, wanting her, but the pale blue eyes she wanted to see the most were nowhere in sight. She took a few steps and noticed Porter at a nearby table, his eyes filled with concern as he watched her walk through the crowd. He made his way over to her, frowning at the glassy look in her eyes. "Are you okay, Syl?" "Yeah," the musician answered, forcing a smile. "Never better. Where the fuck is my bodyguard?" Porter shifted uncomfortably. "She saw you go into that room with Beth and left." "Left to where, Porter?" Outside, I think. She said she wanted to take a breather. You want me to call her?" He gestured nervously at the comm system, but Scylla just shook her head and staggered off. A few moments later, Beth, dressed disheveled and obvious marks on her neck, walked out of the private room, a smirk on her face. "How's it going, Porter?" Beth asked. The blonde looked at his once childhood friend. She had always been trouble, and it didn't look like that had changed much. "You should go, Beth. Scylla already has everything she needs here." "Obviously not, or she wouldn't have just been with me," Beth answered. "Oh, by the way, do go in there if you want. There's plenty of party favors to go around. And I certainly remember what you had a taste for. Well, besides Scylla, of course." Porter's jaw clenched. "Leave, Beth." The security man left the artistic director standing there and stalked off, determined to keep an eye on Scylla until he could get Rael back into the room. He was just about to lift his arm to call her when he finally spotted her with the same group of girls she'd been with at the start of the reception. He spied Scylla watching them and held his breath as the musician made her way over to them. Tally stopped mid-sentence as she watched Scylla Ramshorn walking through the crowd directly towards them. "Ray?" the redhead whispered. The bodyguard turned to see Scylla, a frown on her face. She didn't know what the hell the musician had been doing with Beth, but she knew she didn't like it. The jealousy that overcame her was enough to send her on a walk along the security escape routes to clear her head while she had Porter stationed near the room to ensure that Scylla was safe. She had only returned a few minutes ago and found Scylla still in the room, so she left the watch on the door to Porter. She couldn't just stand here and watch and wonder. Now, Scylla stepped up to them, slipping an arm around Rael's waist. Rael stiffened at the touch, but then attempted to relax. She looked at the musician, but Scylla's eyes were on the FBI agents instead of her. Well, well, if it isn't the famous Alder of the FBI. Miss Agent in charge herself, defiler of new agents, gifter of toasters. Scylla set her voice mocking, as she glared at the older agent. Her eyes turned to Tally and she smirked. "And how are you liking the new field office, Red?" Tally's face reddened and Alder's jaw clenched as Scylla chuckled. "I have to admit, confessing the affair, changing offices before I could call my little friends? Well played, Alder." "Miss Ramshorn," Alder began, but stopped as Abigail and Dr. Monroe walked up to the group. "Excellent show, Scylla," the doctor offered politely. "You mean you were actually able to keep your eyes off of my bodyguard long enough to see it?" Scylla asked. "It was a challenge," answered the doctor with a shrug. The doctor's answer sent a jolt of anger into the musician. "Scylla," Rael said, stepping away from the musician. "Are you okay?" "Oh, I'm just dandy," Scylla responded, her eyes turning to the newest arrival. "I don't know you, but I certainly think we should fix that." Abigail's brow rose, but she offered the brunette an even smile. "Abigail Bellwether." Scylla thought for a moment, trying to focus through the fog she felt. "General Petra Bellwether's daughter?" "The one and only," Abigail answered. Scylla nodded. "I saw the check for the Twist Foundation. Most impressive. And I see you were charitable enough to invite all your little friends." "I think that was your kindness," Abigail answered. Scylla's brows rose, and then she recalled that at nearly the beginning of Rael's employment, Isadora had set the bodyguard up with a few tickets for Fort Salem. So she was fitting the bill for the bitch FBI agent and her red-headed partner. Scylla shrugged. "What can I say? I'm always willing to give to those who serve, and we all know Tally's willing to serve. Rael, Alder." The musician droned off and stepped up to Abigail, invading her personal space. "And what about you? Do you still serve our great military?" "Yes, ma'am," Abigail answered automatically, straightening up. Scylla leaned in and tilted her head up, whispering in Abigail's ears. "Then you should let me give you something. A little thank you for all that you do." The musician had slid her arm around Abigail's waist, her hand touching Abigail's back. As she continued to speak, she slid her hand down, lower, barely missing her intended target. "Ray knows my room number, if you decide that you would want me to serve you tonight. Maybe she'll even join in," the musician said, giving a wink with her glossy eyes. The musician stepped back, almost as quickly as she had moved forward, and offered the group a smile. "Well, if you'll excuse me, I've got other people to say hello to before the evening is done." The group looked at each other and then at Rael. What might have been intended to be a whisper certainly wasn't, and Rael's face had reddened equal measurements of anger and embarrassment. "Fuck," Abigail said after a long silence. "That woman is a complete bitch, and her eyes were so glossy. Whatever she's on, it is definitely in full effect." "She was high," Alder said simply. "Yeah," Rael confirmed with a sigh. "I thought something had changed after the intermission." Tally shook her head. "Goddess, Ray, you can't be with someone who—" "I know," Rael answered. "I just don't get it. I talked to her right before she went on. She was fine. We were more than fine." "Has Miss Ramshorn done this before? Is she an abuser or addict?" Alder asked. Rael shook her head. "She's been like this before, and I asked Byron about it. According to her brother, she just had a bad night." "Looks to me like she's taking something not as prescribed," Dr. Monroe muttered. Rael looked at Alice and frowned. Byron said that she had a problem with drugs right after their parents died, but that she eventually quit and has been off of them for years. "I've only seen her like this one other time, and Garrett—" Rael stopped speaking as understanding finally hit her. "Garrett," Rael repeated. "You mean that guy that stormed into the guest house when we were doing the interview?" Telly asked. "Yeah, her publicist. The last time I saw her high, it was the night after we'd broken things off. She was upset. We both were. Then Garrett intervened, and the next thing everyone sees is her flying high all day." Alice snorted. "Rael, I'm sorry to say this, but I seriously doubt he put a gun to her head and forced her to snort or swallow something." "Well, something's not adding up," Telly answered. "If Ray says—" A loud popping noise had them all jumping, but the sound was only from fireworks that the hotel had set off in Scylla's honor. Several of the guests made their way to the windows to watch. Rael saw Scylla with her arms linked with two other women. It was clear she was back to being the siren she had gained a reputation for being. Beside her, Alder was thinking, calculating. "Rael, if we can find drugs on—" "No," Rael said firmly. Alder's brow rose, and Rael stepped closer to the FBI agent. "She's my responsibility. I will get her safely back to her room. I will get rid of— It would give us access. Leverage." "No, Sarah," Telly said, putting an arm on her lover. "We are supposed to find a killer and help Rael protect Scylla, not ruin her life." Alder frowned but finally nodded. "We should go then." Rael offered Alder a small smile. "Thank you." Abigail looked warily at the musician flirting with her guests and back to her friend. "Look, shitbird, I'm amending my suggestions. She needs to get her shit together before you go down that path. Don't let her drag you down. Don't get caught up in her trauma." Rael nodded. If only they could see the side of Scylla Ramshorn that she knew. "I'll be careful, Abs." "Uh-huh," Abigail said, leaning in and giving the blonde a hug. "I can see that you're already head over heels. Try to keep her safe without getting yourself dead." "Roger that," Rael answered. She watched as her friends made their exit, taking the good Dr. Monroe with them. She hoped that the second night here at Fort Salem would be less eventful. Lifting her mic arm to her mouth, she called for Porter. He arrived at her side a few moments later. "Where is it?" Rael asked with her palm out, expecting to confiscate whatever had altered Scylla's state of mind. "What?" Porter asked. "The drugs, Porter. I know she's high." "The private room," Porter answered. "Did Beth bring them?" Rael asked, but already thought she knew the answer. "Garrett, I think," Porter answered. "We need to get rid of them. Now." While the musician finished charming the guests and the last of the fireworks went off, Porter and Rael entered the private room, and the blonde blanched at the sight. There were enough drugs present to probably kill every guest at the party. Some of it she didn't even recognize. They worked quickly, using the washroom to dispose of everything. After it was done and the party began to wrap up, Rael found Scylla and pulled her away from the remaining guests. "I think we need to get you to bed." "Oh, now that your little friends are gone and Dr. Alice Monroe has left the building, you're suddenly interested in getting me into bed?" She was wide awake. With the drinks and the lines she did with Beth, Scylla felt like she could go on forever, yet she knew she was lashing out. She didn't really mean anything she was saying. She just couldn't stop it from happening. Rael's jaw clenched. "No, Scylla, but the evening is about over. You need rest for tomorrow." "Well, I don't feel like resting," Scylla said, her voice raising and drawing the attention of those remaining. "I feel like we should keep going." There were a few enthusiastic murmurs and a couple of shouts, and Scylla turned to the remaining partygoers with a grin. Walking over to the bar, she reached for a bottle of whiskey and opened it. She took a long drink straight from the bottle, and Rael sighed. "Fine. Have fun. At least the alcohol was legal." She walked away from the musician and met Porter at the door. "I'll stay with her," Porter promised. "You and me both," Rael answered sadly. Leaning against the door frame beside Porter, Rael watched and waited for the musician, the woman she loved, to finally come down from the high she was on. She knew that tomorrow they would both be hurting. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.